You were never disciplined enough for college anyway, my mother said, smiling over the rim of her wine glass, and 23 people at my brother's going away party heard every word. By then, my parents had already sent my university a fake tuition refund request in my name, redirected $6,240 to themselves, and left me locked out of registration with an unpaid balance I did not create. They told relatives I had taken the money, told my campus supervisor I was having some kind of breakdown, and expected me to go quiet because they were my parents. Then one Tuesday morning, a woman from University Mail Services said 7 words that changed everything. I know who signed for that check. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. My name is Danielle Mercer. I'm 24 years old. Now let me take you back to Cedar Falls, Iowa, in May of 2022. My younger brother Owen was leaving for Seattle 3 days later for a software job he had been talking about for a year. And my parents treated his going away party like a coronation. My mother, Linda Mercer, had rented the back room of a restaurant called the Copper Birch in downtown Cedar Falls, and she had gone all in on details nobody asked for. Blue and silver balloons framed baby photos of Owen at every age, a printed sign that said "Adventure starts here," and tiny favor boxes tied with ribbon that she kept rearranging because apparently the angle mattered. The room smelled like rosemary chicken butter and the sharp, sweet note of white wine that always made me think of holidays where someone eventually cried in a bathroom. I had almost not gone. That is the part I wish I could tell you I got right instinctively, but I did not. I went because my aunt said it would mean a lot to Owen, and because Owen and I had never been enemies even when my parents tried to make us compete. He was 21, bright, restless, and still young enough to believe that if he kept his head down, our parents' behavior would pass around him like weather. My father, Mark Mercer, liked to say Owen had focus and I had feelings. It was one of those lines he had used for so long, people started repeating it like a family joke. That is how cruelty settles in. It learns to sound casual. I got there at 6:12 with a card, a used record player I had cleaned up for him, and a knot in my stomach I could not explain yet. 2 days earlier, I had tried to log into my student account at the University of Northern Iowa to confirm my summer session schedule and found a hold I had never seen before. Outstanding balance, registration blocked, transcript blocked, refund adjustment processed. At first, I thought it was a clerical mess, because that is how institutions train you to think. Surely there is a normal explanation. Surely one email will fix this. Instead, I opened my billing tab and saw that $6,240 had been removed from my student ledger on April 28th as a tuition refund, but I had never requested a refund and had not dropped a single class. By 6:15, I had already spent one entire workday on the phone with the bursar's office, financial aid, and student records. Nobody could tell me much because the request appeared to come from my student portal and was backed by a signed form they said they had received by fax. A fax. In 2022, the woman in the bursar's office, whose name I later learned was Sheila Park, sounded uneasy when she said the signature line looked off to her, but she was not willing to go further over the phone. She told me to come in person with identification. I planned to do that the following Monday. In the meantime, I told exactly 3 people: my roommate Tessa, my campus supervisor Nina Alvarez, and my grandmother's oldest friend Evelyn Baird, who had known me since I was 6, and still called before big things because she believed life should be witnessed. Evelyn was 68 then, narrow-shouldered, silver-haired, always in a pressed cardigan no matter the weather. She had been invited to the party because she had also known my mother since they were girls. She came up to me near the gift table, touched my wrist, and said quietly, "You look like somebody moved the floor half an inch to the left." It was such a strange and precise sentence that I laughed in spite of myself. I told her I was dealing with something at school and did not want to talk about it there. She nodded once as if I had said something serious enough to deserve being carried carefully, and told me she would sit near the back if I needed an excuse to breathe. That was Evelyn. She never pried. She made room. At 7 o'clock, my mother tapped a spoon against a glass and called for everyone's attention. The overhead lights in the party room were warm and low, and everybody turned toward her with that soft, obedient expression people get when they expect a toast and not a public performance. She talked about Owen's work ethic, his drive, his clean apartment habits, his ability to stay focused on goals. Then she said some children are built for the long road and some are not. And her eyes slid to me with perfect timing, like this had been rehearsed. A few people shifted in their chairs. My father chuckled before she even landed the line. Then she raised her glass and said, "You were never disciplined enough for college anyway." There is a specific kind of silence that only happens when a room realizes too late that it has become an audience. I felt heat move up my neck so fast it made my scalp prickle. My cousin Rachel looked down at her plate. My Aunt Denise made a tiny sound, not a word, just breath through her nose. Owen stared at our mother with his mouth half open, like maybe he still believed she would fix it in the next sentence. She did not. Instead, she smiled and added, "Maybe this little refund business is the universe being honest for once." My father laughed then, a short, mean sound, and said, "Some people just are not meant to finish what they start." That was when I understood something I had not wanted to know. They already knew about the refund. They knew because they had done it. I stood up so abruptly my chair legs scraped the floor. I asked my mother very evenly what she meant by this little refund business. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin and said, "Danielle, not tonight." My father gave me a look that would have flattened me when I was 13 and said, "Do not make your brother's night about your poor choices." Poor choices. As if I had chosen to wake up that week with my classes frozen and my account in debt. As if $6,240 had just drifted away. The thing about humiliation is that your body keeps moving long after your mind has split in two. One half of me was still standing in that overheated party room, hearing silverware clink and somebody in the kitchen laugh at something unrelated. The other half was already sorting facts. They know. They said refund. They know the amount. They are daring me to react before I have proof. That is how long it took them to erase me. Less than a toast. Evelyn rose from her chair before I could say another word. She did not speak to my parents. She simply walked to my side, picked up my cardigan from the back of my chair, folded it over her arm and said, "Danielle, come outside with me for a minute." It was the calmest sentence in the room, and because it was calm, everybody made space for us. Out on the sidewalk, the air smelled like rain on concrete and cigarette smoke from the bar next door. My hands were shaking. Evelyn opened her handbag, passed me a packet of tissues, and said, "Whatever this is, do not answer it with your mouth. Answer it with paper." I went home that night with Tessa, who had texted me from her seat halfway through the toast. "Are you okay? Want me to fake a fire?" Tessa Kim was 25, a nursing student with a habit of showing up in silence and leaving practical things behind. At home, she made mint tea, turned off the big overhead light in our apartment kitchen, and set a yellow legal pad in front of me without comment. Then she slid my laptop across the table and said, "Write down every date you remember before they start trying to rewrite them." That was the line I held on to for the next 11 months before they start trying to rewrite them. I wrote until after midnight. April 26th, normal account. April 28th, refund adjustment. May 2nd, registration block. May 4th, bursar's office call. May 7th, party. I wrote down exact phrases from the toast while they were still raw. I wrote who was in the room, where Evelyn sat, which cousin looked away, which server paused with a tray in her hand. I screenshotted my account ledger. Every email, every text from my mother asking if I was excited for Owen's party, while she already knew my semester had been blown apart. At 1:14 in the morning, I pulled my credit union app and looked at my own deposits, just to steady myself with reality. No mystery 60240, no cashing of anything. Nothing but my campus paycheck and rent. At 8:30 Monday morning, I drove to campus in a gray drizzle that left the sidewalks shining. The university administration building smelled like old carpet and copier toner, the smell of every office where bad news is delivered with a smile. Sheila Park met me in person. She was in her early 50s, careful with her words, with short dark hair and glasses that she kept pushing up as she spoke. She printed the refund request and turned it toward me. The form listed my student ID, my program, my social security number partially redacted, and a mailing address that was not mine. It was my parents' house on Briarwood Lane. The signature on the form looked like someone had studied mine and then written it slower, as if carefulness could replace familiarity. I remember touching the edge of the paper and feeling the texture of the toner under my fingertips. It made the whole thing horrifyingly ordinary. Sheila lowered her voice and said, "I cannot accuse anybody for you, but this should not have cleared as cleanly as it did." She explained that, because the request came with enough identifying information, and because the form included a fax header that appeared local, the refund was processed and a check was mailed to the alternate address on file. The check had been deposited. She could not yet show me the endorsement image, but she said I needed to contact campus police and get a report started immediately. She also said I should speak to financial aid because the refund had triggered a balance due, which could affect my summer enrollment if not corrected. That was the first day I heard how quickly a simple theft can become a life problem. Once the refund left my student account, the unpaid tuition balance hit my record. Once that balance sat there, the registration hold blocked my summer classes. Once those classes were blocked, the clinic in Des Moines where I was supposed to start my patient intake internship in June told me they needed proof I was still actively enrolled. One forged form, one mailed check, and my next 6 months started unraveling in linked little knots. A person does not need to steal your whole future to delay it enough to wound you. Campus police took my report that afternoon. The officer was straightforward and younger than I expected, maybe 30, with a tired kindness that made me trust him. His name was Officer Brian Keene. I told him I believed my parents had redirected the refund, and even saying it out loud made me feel exposed in a way I had not expected. Family betrayal sounds ugly when you hear your own voice say it to a stranger. He asked if I had spoken to them. I said not yet. He advised me not to confront them alone and to keep all contact in writing if possible. Then he said something that startled me by how much relief it gave me. "You are not overreacting. Somebody moved money by pretending to be you. That matters." I left with a copy of the report and sat in my car for 6 minutes before turning the key. Rain ticked against the windshield. I could smell the wet wool of my cardigan and the cold coffee in my cup holder. I called Nina Alvarez from the parking lot because I knew my parents would try to get ahead of me. Nina supervised the front desk at the counseling center where I worked 20 hours a week. She had 2 teenagers, a permanent stack of pens in her bun, and an expression that told people nonsense would be expensive. I told her there was a problem with my tuition refund and I believed my parents were involved. She was quiet for a second, then said, "Email me a summary right now and attach whatever records you have. If anyone calls here talking around you, I want your version first." By evening, the first escalation arrived. My father texted, "You embarrassed your mother last night. We need to discuss your instability before you make things worse." 15 minutes later, my mother texted, "If you took that check and are panicking now, confess privately. Do not drag the family into this." I stared at those messages until my vision blurred. There it was, not denial, not confusion, a story already built and waiting to be placed on top of me. I did not answer with my mouth. I answered with screenshots. The next 10 days taught me more than my entire childhood about the difference between being loved and being managed. My parents did not call once to ask what had happened with my classes. They called my Aunt Denise, my grandmother's church friend Marla, and 2 of my brother's old coaches. They told them I had been in trouble with the university and was trying to blame the family out of shame. My mother told people I had become secretive since moving out and was probably mixed up with bad influences. That phrase still makes me laugh now because the bad influence in question was Tessa, who color-coded our grocery list and called me from the pharmacy if my allergy medicine was on sale. Then they went after the institutions around me. My mother phoned the financial aid office pretending to be a concerned parent and said I was under emotional strain and should not be allowed to make changes to my account without family involvement. They noted the call in my file, which I only discovered later when a counselor read the contact history to me. My father called the counseling center where I worked and left a voicemail for Nina saying I had been lying and stealing for months and that he hoped they understood the risk of keeping me near confidential information. Nina forwarded me the voicemail and saved the original. She did not editorialize. Her entire email was one line: "Keep building your folder." That is what I did. I bought a 3-inch binder and a pack of divider tabs in calm colors because I could not bear the bright office supply aisle that day. I labeled sections: student account, messages, witnesses, work, timeline, police. I printed everything. I wrote down every phone call with date, time, name, and exact language. I went to my credit union and got a letter confirming no deposit matching $6,240 had ever entered my account. I went back to the bursar's office and signed the release, allowing them to share the check image with campus police. When the image arrived, the endorsement on the back was ugly and hurried. Not my handwriting at all, but the deposit stamp from Prairie State Community Bank showed enough to establish where it had gone. That bank was where my parents had a joint account. I knew because my mother had once made me stand in line there at 17 to notarize something for a summer camp form. The memory flashed so sharply I could smell the lemon cleaner in their lobby. Officer Keene could not show me the full account details yet, but he said the branch information matched. He also asked if anyone in my family had access to old school forms or copies of my signature. I thought of the plastic file crate my mother kept in the hall closet with each child's report cards, immunization records, and every official document she had ever decided belonged more to her than to us. Parents can keep archives like love. Sometimes it is inventory. Owen called me on May 19th. His voice sounded younger than it had in years. He said Mom and Dad claimed I was trying to punish them for helping him move. I asked him one question. Did you know before the party that there was a refund issue on my account? He said no immediately, too quickly, and then admitted our mother had said at brunch that I had messed something up at school and was being dramatic. I asked whether he had seen any mail at the house from the university. He was silent long enough for me to hear traffic through his car speakers. Then he said very quietly that he had seen an envelope from the university with my name on it, on the kitchen counter in early May. He had not thought much of it because our mother said she was keeping it safe. I thanked him and told him to write that down with the date as best he could remember. He said, Danielle, I did not know. I believed him, and somehow that made it worse. My parents escalated again 2 days later. A woman from my church growing up called to say my mother had asked the prayer chain to keep me in their thoughts because I was making false accusations during a mental health episode. I almost admired the efficiency of it. Theft, then character assassination, then community framing. They were laying down soft language in public so that if hard facts arrived later, people would already have a story that protected them. This is what some families understand instinctively. If they cannot control the evidence, they will try to control the mood around it. I met with a lawyer in Waterloo named Janet Hall on May 24th. I'm careful with language, and I know some people hear lawyer and assume dramatics. It was not dramatic, it was practical. Janet was 63, dry-voiced, pearl earrings, legal pad balanced on one knee. She looked over my stack of printouts and said, "You do not need to explain to me why this feels impossible. I just need the sequence." So I gave her the sequence. She told me not to answer any phone calls from my parents, not to go to their house, and not to let relatives broker a peace conversation. She also drafted a short letter for the university confirming that I disputed the refund, had made a police report, and requested that the hold not be treated as an admission of debt while the fraud was investigated. Plain language, clean facts, no performance. That letter bought me time. The summer registration block stayed in place for another week, then was temporarily lifted after Sheila and someone in student accounts reviewed the fraud note on my file. But the internship in Des Moines did not wait. They selected another student because they needed certainty and I could not give it to them. I remember reading that email in our apartment laundry room because I had gone down with detergent in my arms, and when the message came through, I just stood there listening to the dryer thump like a second heartbeat. I had worked for that placement for 8 months. Not glamorous work, patient intake, scheduling paperwork. But it was a step, and they stole it with a form and a mailbox. That is how long it took them to move me sideways in my own life. Tessa found me there and did the thing she always did when I was close to unraveling. She did not ask if I was okay because the answer was obvious. She took the detergent from my hands, put it on top of the machine and said, "Come upstairs, I made noodles." It sounds small now, it was not small then. There are people who save you with speeches, and there are people who save you by making sure you eat while you gather evidence. Tessa was the second kind. By early June, relatives had started coming around one by one to suggest I let it go. Aunt Denise invited me for coffee and said my parents were embarrassed and maybe had only borrowed the refund thinking they would replace it. Borrowed. As if you can borrow money from a school account by pretending to be your daughter. I told her politely that if someone signed my name, changed my address, and cashed a check meant for my tuition, there was nothing to let go of. She cried a little and said families break over less. I said families also break because one person keeps being asked to absorb what nobody else will name. Even Evelyn got pressure. She called me one evening and said in that crisp, exact way of hers, "Your mother would like me to tell you that Mercy looks attractive on women." I laughed so hard I startled myself. Evelyn waited for me to stop and then said, "I told her accountability looks better." I can still hear the porcelain clink in the background from her setting down a teacup. Then she added, "I was in that room. I heard what she said. Do not let them reduce this to feelings when it began with a check." In June, Officer Keene called to tell me they had confirmed the refund check had been deposited by mobile app into an account held jointly by my parents. There were limits on what he could disclose while the case was open, but he had enough to interview them. I sat on my bed with my notebook open and wrote down every word he would let me. My father denied everything and said I had likely used their address for convenience because I was disorganized. My mother said she had no idea how any check reached their account and suggested maybe I had mailed it to them during one of my dramatic spells and forgotten. My brother was not present for those interviews, but my Aunt Denise was. She had driven my mother because my father had blood pressure issues and did not want to deal with parking. Later, Denise told me my mother kept touching her necklace and asking whether mistakes between family members really needed to become official. That is what a lot of guilty people want, not innocence, less record. Here is the point where I want to ask you something, because if you have ever been in this kind of situation, you will understand the shape of it. Have you ever noticed how the people who hurt you become suddenly obsessed with privacy the minute there is paperwork? Not privacy when they humiliated you, not privacy when they lied about you to neighbors. Privacy only when dates, signatures, and bank stamps show up. That was exactly where I was by July, surrounded by records, still somehow treated like the disruptive one. July brought the third escalation, and it was the ugliest. My father had me served with small claims papers for $2,100 he said I owed them for car insurance, orthodontics from high school, and household support from ages 19 to 20. I had moved out at 22. Some of the charges dated back 6 years. The papers were absurd and full of rough math, but they were real enough to require a response, which was the whole point. Time, pressure, humiliation. Janet Hall looked them over and almost smiled, which was the first comforting expression I had seen on a professional face in weeks. She said, "This is not a debt list. This is retaliation wearing a polo shirt." She helped me respond, attach my records, and keep my tone boring. Boring is powerful when someone wants chaos. The hearing was set for August. I hated every minute leading to it. The courthouse in Black Hawk County had that over air-conditioned smell of paper and floor wax, and my parents sat 6 seats away from me in the hall, pretending I did not exist. My mother wore a navy blazer, as if respectability could be steamed on. My father leafed through his folder dramatically, but his pages were not organized. Mine were tabbed. Janet did most of the talking. The judge asked simple questions that did not favor theatrics. Do you have an agreement for these amounts? No. Do you have invoices? No. Why are these costs being sought now? My father muttered something about ingratitude. The judge dismissed the claim. Outside the courtroom, my mother walked past me so closely, our sleeves brushed, and said, "This is why people leave you." It was a nasty line, intimate in the way only old family insults can be. I wrote it down in my car before I started the engine. My secondary villain in all of this was my Aunt Denise. And I need to be honest about her. She was my mother's younger sister, 56, a woman who had spent decades smoothing over whatever Linda broke. She did not forge anything. She did not cash the check, but she carried messages, repeated lies, and kept asking me to think about what public consequences might do to my parents standing in church and in town. She was complicit because she valued peace more than truth, and peace built that way always comes at someone else's cost. Still, near the end, I saw one human crack in her that I did not expect. I will come back to that. By September, the university completed its internal review. The bursar restored the $6,240 to my student account and removed the balance due. The hold was lifted permanently. My transcript was released. I got an email from financial aid confirming the refund request was determined not to have been authorized by me. It should have felt like victory. Instead, I cried in the student union bathroom because restoring money is not the same as restoring the months you lost while other people whispered about you. My internship was gone. My reputation had been dragged through rooms I would never see. That kind of damage is real even when the ledger is corrected. Word had started to travel by then, though not because of me. Prairie State had closed my parents' account after its own review. Somebody's cousin worked there. Somebody's hairdresser heard from a teller's sister that there had been an issue involving a university check. Church people talk in low voices as if soft volume makes gossip holy. I did not feed any of it. I stayed in class, at work, and in my lane. But information has a smell, and once it gets into a small community, it moves under doors. The reveal happened in November, 6 months after the party, in the exact same restaurant room where my mother had tried to shrink me. The irony was not planned by me. It arrived by way of my cousin Rachel's baby shower. Rachel adored symmetry and had booked the copper birch before any of this reached its full ugly shape, and by the time invitations were out, no one wanted to move the event. I considered not going. Tessa said she would support either choice. Evelyn said, if they can sit in that room after what happened, so can you. So I wore a soft green dress, low heels, and the expression I had been practicing all year, which was not forgiveness and not fear, just steadiness. The room looked different in daylight. Pale gold wallpaper, fake greenery draped around a mirror, little tea sandwiches lined in rows. But I still knew where my chair had been in May, where my mother's glass had caught the light when she said the sentence she wanted people to remember. Some of the same faces were there. Aunt Denise in a mauve blouse, Marla from church. Owen home for the weekend, thinner and quieter. My parents came 15 minutes late together. Linda carrying tissue paper and Mark scanning the room as if checking temperature. They did not approach me. That was fine. Silence from them had become almost luxurious. Evelyn sat at my table in a slate blue jacket with pearl buttons. She leaned toward me once while people were eating cucumber sandwiches and said, if today is ordinary, let it be ordinary. If it is not, sit up straight. Her lipstick was exactly the color of dried roses. I remember that because memory catches on odd things when you're braced for impact. Halfway through gift opening, a woman in a university mail services badge appeared at the doorway with a clipboard tucked against her chest. She looked around uncertainly, clearly aware she had entered a private event by mistake or necessity. Rachel's husband got up first, thinking maybe there was a delivery issue. The woman said she was looking for Linda or Mark Mercer. My mother turned in her chair with that polite public smile she used when she thought she had control. I'm Linda, she said. The woman stepped in and introduced herself as Donna Falk from the University of Northern Iowa Mail Services Department. She was in her early 60s, broad-shouldered, with cropped blonde hair and the kind of clear, practical voice people get after decades of repeating procedures to those who think rules are optional. She said she was very sorry to interrupt, but had been trying to reach the Mercers at home about a certified letter that required signature clarification connected to an active mailing review. My father stood up halfway and said this was not an appropriate time. Donna nodded and said, then this should only take a second. I know who signed for the tuition refund envelope addressed to Danielle Mercer because our carrier flagged the handwriting after the address change request was questioned. You could feel the room pulling inward around that sentence. Not a sound from the kitchen, not a fork on a plate. Donna looked down at her clipboard and continued in the same procedural tone. The tone of somebody who has no idea she is detonating a lie in front of its witnesses. She said the certified follow-up packet contained copies of the reroute authorization and local delivery log because the original check mailing had been forwarded from student accounts after an address update. The carrier had made a note because the person who accepted the envelope on Briarwood Lane first signed Danielle, then corrected it, and signed Linda Mercer underneath. The note had sat in a route file until their office got a request from campus police in June, and then a separate records pull in October. Donna said I was told to make sure Mrs. Mercer received the correction letter because the original signature line and the corrected line are both visible. My mother did not faint, did not cry, did not throw anything. Real collapse is rarely theatrical. She kept holding the baby gift ribbon she had been twisting around her fingers, then slowly let it drop into her lap. My father opened his mouth and said, Dan. Then he stopped halfway through my name, just stopped, across from me. Aunt Denise put her hand over her own mouth and stared at my mother with something close to horror. Not because she had learned the truth in that exact second, I think, but because she had just watched a stranger lay it in the center of the table where no family script could cover it. Donna, still not understanding the full social damage she had just done, asked whether Linda would like to sign for the letter now or whether she should leave a notice and return tomorrow. Rachel's mother-in-law, who had no idea what any of this meant but knew enough to sense disgrace, stood up and offered the woman a pen. It would almost be funny if it had not cost me so much. My mother stared at the clipboard and did not move. Then Evelyn Baird did something I will love her for until my last day on earth. She took off her glasses, looked directly at Donna, and said in a voice clear enough for every person in that room, "I believe you should read the name on the receipt line one more time, dear." Some of us were present the first time Danielle was accused. Donna blinked, looked down, and read it plainly. The corrected recipient's signature is Linda Mercer. No flourish, no speech, no accusation, just a woman reading from a log sheet because she had been asked to complete a task. That was the verdict. What I remember most is not my own reaction. It is the room's. Rachel set down the baby blanket she had been unfolding and did not look at my mother. Owen leaned back in his chair and pressed his lips together until the color left them. Marla from church lowered her eyes into her lap in that specific way people do when they realize they have helped the wrong person. Aunt Denise whispered, "Oh, Linda." Not loud, not dramatic, just stripped bare. It was the first honest thing she had said in months. My mother finally took the clipboard with both hands as if it were heavier than paper should be. She signed for the letter. Donna thanked her, apologized again for the interruption, and left. The door clicked shut. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Nobody defended my parents. That is another thing people do not tell you about exposure. Once the right outsider speaks, family systems can go very quiet because everyone is recalculating at once. My father pulled out his chair as if to stand, then sat back down. He looked at the tablecloth, not at me. My mother opened the certified envelope with shaking fingers, unfolded the letter, and got as far as the second paragraph before her hands stopped cooperating. She set the pages down. I did not ask to see them. I did not need to. I had spent months building a case no one wanted to hear. Now a woman from mail services had walked in wearing a badge and sensible shoes and read the thing they could not talk around. Evelyn placed her napkin beside her plate and said, calmly, "That is enough for one shower." Then she stood. Several other women stood too. Not because she was in charge, but because truth changes posture in a room. Rachel's husband started collecting plates. Someone took the tea urn back to the counter. Normal motions resumed around a broken center. I still did not speak. The proxy rule of my own survival had become clear by then. I was done trying to make people hear me while they were invested in not hearing. Let the documents speak. Let the bank stamps speak. Let the carrier's route note speak. Let Donna Falk, who probably went back to campus thinking she had merely completed an errand, speak. After the shower, Aunt Denise asked if she could talk to me in the parking lot. The sky was a flat November gray and the wind smelled like cold leaves and fryer oil from the restaurant vent. She stood beside her car, twisting the strap of her purse, and looked 10 years older than she had that spring. "I knew there was a check," she said. "I did not know your sister. I mean, your mother had signed your name first." She was so shaken she misspoke family roles. I waited. She pressed her lips together and tried again. "She told me she was holding it because you were going to waste it, and because she and Mark deserved help after all they had done for you. I told myself it was temporary, then when you pushed back, everything got ugly and I kept telling myself I was keeping the family from breaking." I asked her whether she had heard my mother tell church people I was unstable. She nodded. I asked whether she had driven my mother to speak to police. Another nod. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Why did my mother's comfort matter more to you than the truth?" Denise cried then. But it was not manipulative crying, not the kind aimed at moving me. It was delayed recognition, which is sadder, she said, because she trained all of us that way. There it was. Not redemption. Not innocence. Just one honest sentence from a woman who had spent a lifetime orbiting the loudest person in the room. I did not hug her. I did not absolve her. I told her if anyone asked, she could tell the truth now or say nothing at all. Then I got into Tessa's car because she had waited the whole time with the heater running, and we drove home in silence except for the turn signal clicking at each light. Community consequences unfolded without any help from me. My parents were asked to step down from coordinating the church scholarship fundraiser that winter. No formal announcement, just a line in the bulletin the next month thanking new volunteers for taking over. My father's hardware supplier stopped extending him the informal grace he liked to brag about getting. One of my mother's closest social friends quietly stopped inviting her to monthly dinners. People in a town like Cedar Falls rarely stage a public reckoning. They rearrange access, doors open slower, calls stop being returned. The story moved on its own because it no longer needed me to carry it. The police matter did not end in some dramatic siren-filled scene either. It resolved the way many adult things do, through meetings, records, embarrassment, and enough evidence that excuses got expensive. My parents repaid the university through a restitution agreement handled between them, the school, and the investigators. The details were not mine to control by then, which was actually a relief. I had spent enough of my 20s trying to clean up what older people broke. Janet told me the practical part was over when the school confirmed my account was whole. The false balance was gone, and no debt related to that refund would follow me. She closed my folder, tapped it once, and said, "Keep the copies anyway. Truth has a shorter memory than paper." In January of the next year, I got a new internship at a community clinic in Iowa City, smaller than the one I lost. Less prestigious, better people. On my first day, the waiting room smelled like coffee and winter coats, and one of the nurses handed me a stack of intake forms with a smile that was so unremarkable it almost made me cry. Ordinary trust after prolonged suspicion feels almost holy. My classes resumed cleanly. My transcript held. Life did not become glamorous, it became mine again. Owen and I rebuilt slowly. He apologized without asking for instant closeness, which I respected. He admitted he had spent most of his life surviving our parents by minimizing them, and that my refusal to do that had made him call me difficult because it was easier than admitting I was seeing things clearly. We started with small things, coffee when he came home, one long walk by the river, no forced holidays, no speeches. He is still my brother. He is not a bridge back to them. As for my parents, there was no cinematic confrontation. No final scene where I unloaded years of pain and they suddenly understood. What I got instead was something smaller and in some ways more accurate. Silence. My mother sent one text 3 weeks after the baby shower that said, "We have all suffered enough." I did not answer. My father left a voicemail in February that began with, "I never meant for," and then stopped. As if even alone with a machine he could not finish a truthful sentence. That was his broken line. That was all. I wish I could tell you forgiveness arrived neatly, with a lesson tied around it like ribbon. It did not. Full forgiveness has not arrived yet, and I am no longer interested in pretending that makes me less healed. What arrived first was clarity, then distance, then a quieter kind of self-respect. I stopped explaining my boundaries to people who only valued them when they kept others comfortable. I stopped attending family events where invitation meant target. I stopped trying to earn tenderness from those who preferred control. The most surprising part was how much my body changed once I believed my own memory. I slept better. I stopped checking my phone at 2 in the morning expecting another lie to clean up. The muscles in my jaw unclenched. Tessa joked that my forehead had recovered from a year-long argument with gravity. She was probably right. Trauma takes up square footage in a person, so does peace. Evelyn stayed steady through all of it. In the spring, almost a year after the party, she invited me to her house for lunch. She served tomato soup in heavy cream-colored bowls and cut grilled cheese into precise triangles like I was still 10. Sunlight came through the lace curtains and made a pattern on the table. She asked about my classes, my clinic, whether I was sleeping, whether the basil on my apartment windowsill was still alive. Then she reached into a drawer and handed me a folded note card. Inside, she had written one sentence in her neat hand. "They counted on your shame more than they counted on your record keeping." I keep that card in my desk now. That line explains almost everything. My parents believed humiliation would freeze me. They believed if they said I was irresponsible in front of enough people, the label would stick more easily than the truth. They believed institutions would shrug, relatives would pressure me, and I would do what I had always done as the family scapegoat, which was carry the discomfort so everyone else could keep eating cake. But paper is patient, systems are flawed, yes, but they leave trails. and every time they escalated, they created one more record I could place in the binder. There are still moments that catch in me. A return address from Briarwood Lane on junk mail, the smell of white wine at a restaurant, a toast where someone jokes about who was always the difficult child. Healing is not a straight road, and some injuries stay tender because they were delivered by hands that were supposed to protect you. I know that now without feeling weak for knowing it. The wound is real. So is the life I built around it. The last thing I want to leave you with is not the reveal itself, though I still think about Donna Falk reading that receipt line in her brisk office voice. It is the ending that came after, the one nobody films. Last Tuesday, Tessa and I made pasta in our apartment kitchen while rain tapped at the windows. Owen came by with grocery store flowers because he had forgotten to call the week before and was trying awkwardly to do better. Nina sent me a text asking how the clinic rotation was going. Evelyn called to remind me to cover my basil at night because the temperature was dropping. We ate at the table with no performance, no speeches, no one keeping score. Just steam rising off bowls, wet shoes by the door, and people who chose to be there. That is the life I won back. Not revenge that made me louder, not justice that made me cruel, just a room where I am not being rewritten. And after everything my parents did, that